So let's move on now with our second panel at Munich Cybersecurity Conference Live. Moderator is Madeleine Mayet in Berlin. Since last November, she is a research fellow for cyber norms and cybersecurity of the German Council on Foreign Relations, DGAP. She also serves as an academic expert on cyber at European Center of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats since November 2019. Might has been involved in a lot of different research projects on digital and cyber diplomacy, right-wing populism, and digital political communication. She also published on national cybersecurity strategies, on public-private partnerships, cyber intelligence operations, and hybrid warfare. Our second panel, Tumultous Times, Managing Complexity and Gaining Oversight. Please go ahead.
Thank you for the kind introduction. Good afternoon, morning and evening, and a very, very warm welcome to both our speakers and the audience in front of the screen. I'm honored to chair this second panel of today, Tumultous Times, Managing Complexity and Gaining Oversight, which like to shed light on the constant challenges of an ever-increasing complexity of interconnected information and control systems by posing the question, how can we deal with the increasing complexity from a cyber risk management perspective? The goal is to gain a better understanding of cyber-related risk and threats in a hyper-connectivity era. Please feel free to post questions by using the respective live stream window above, and I will pass them on as soon as we enter the Q&A session. But before we kick off the discussion, let me introduce our speakers. All of them provide a very unique expertise and experience, which will contribute, and I'm very sure about that, to our very interesting discussion. First is Bettina Dietsche, COO of Allianz. She holds not only the position of Chief Operating Officer, but is also a member of the Board of Management at Allianz Global Corporate and Specialty SE since July 2018. She has a range of responsibilities, very impressive, from HR to global business operations, data office, global client and service, multinational IT protection and resilience, which is very important for this panel today, the central portfolio steering, but also global process management as well as strategic vendor management. And most importantly, she's leading the business and IT transformation as part of the new AGSCS strategy program. A very well welcome from me. Next in line, and this is perfectly actually from my notes, Juan Lepafin, Executive Director of ENISA. A few of you, or many of you will know him, who took over his position in October 2019. He has more than 15 years of experience, working experience within the European Union's institutional system, and I can also say system complexity. Prior to joining ENISA, he worked for 6 years for the European Commission, including as head of the cabinet of Vice President Andrus Ansip, and he was responsible for the digital single market, which brought him also into the position to lead and coordinate the preparation and negotiations of the Cybersecurity Act, who kind of unfolds its impact till today. And without a doubt, he has, or we can say that he has EU affairs at heart from the beginning of his career back in Estonia. And next in line is Sandra Joyce, EVP and Head of Global Intelligence, FireEye. She oversees like intelligence collection, research analysis, and support services for threat intelligence, customers, and the whole security product portfolio, which makes her also a perfect fit for this panel with her experience. Especially, I think she will give us a great insights in the new risk of supply chain cybersecurity challenges. Furthermore, she has 20 years of experience, both in national security and commercial industry, and I'm really honored to say that, she has 4 master degrees in cybersecurity and international affairs, science and technology, intelligence, and military operational art and science. And this is a perfect link to our last panelist. Last but not least, Major General Jürgen Setzer is completing the round to shed light on the perspective of the German armed forces with the issues at hand. He serves as the Vice Chief of the German Cyber and Information Domain Service and as Chief of Information Security Officer of the German Bundeswehr since April 2018. He joined the German Armed Forces in the 1980s, so he is also looking back on a very long career in the armed forces, starting by studying informatics at the Bundeswehr University in Munich. He can look back on a long and successful career with assignments both on the ministerial and command level, including operational experience from deployments in the Balkans and Afghanistan, just to name a few. Thank you all for joining, and I will start right away by posing the first question to the whole panel. Cybersecurity becomes more and more complex based on the increasing interconnectivity and also by facing a very large and challenging threat surface recently. And I'm just mentioning what we heard before, from SolarWinds to Hafnium, especially major nation-state attacks have been in the public eye. And of course, during the COVID-19 pandemic, strategic attacks on healthcare organization. And my question to you is, do we see a new quality of exploiting vulnerabilities because of this increasing complexity? And is the large and challenging risk and threat surface we are facing marked by continuity or change, especially when it comes to attack vectors? Are they actually new or not? Starting with Bettina.
Happy to go first. So thanks, Madeleine, first for the introduction, and happy to be here. Well, I would certainly say we see a new way of how we look at cybercraft, the attacks. If you just look at the way ransomware attacks increased drastically over the past 2 years, you can clearly see that we are in a new area when it comes to how to deal with this situation. So certainly I would echo, yes, this is a new way, and it will not go away even after pandemic, because we have our Allianz Global Risk Report, which we issue every year, and we can clearly see cyber has been coming up over the past 2-3 years drastically, together with business interruption as a key threat from all the risk managers. But now with the pandemic, this is certainly something which is very unique and special. But even after the pandemic, you can see that, you know, the dynamics and the business of cyber crime has really issued and brought us to a new level, and this will not go away, certainly even after the pandemic.
Next in line, Jürgen Setzer.
Thank you for having the opportunity. I would not consider the attack vectors entirely new. However, I see 2 developments concerning a new quality of exploiting vulnerabilities. The first, attackers look, from my perspective, for increasingly artful ways to distribute their malware. Instead of targeting, like in former times, the original aim, malware is inserted into supply chain in an early stage, and what that means, we know about it. Secondly, until a few years ago, attackers were content to use one single attack vector. Today, we don't see one single attack vector. We see a combination of attack vectors to one target. And that had also impact. And I said I have two developments, but I would adjust one third one. And we observe that effects spill more and more over the borders of cyber. For example, doxing. Sensitive personal data is stolen, as we know it, then published in social media for everyone to see cyber. And cyber is quickly not the only domain affected. From my perspective, more and more the information domain is as well affected. And that haven't we seen in the past. So coming back to the question, increasingly artful ways to distribute malware and to the combination of attack vectors, the spillover effect and the into the information domain, for me, is the most remarkable current developments in terms of complexity.
Thank you very much. I think that's the perfect link over to Sandra to give us her thoughts on the question.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with this distinguished panel. In my role, we have the blessing and the curse of forensically analyzing attacks around the world. And so for us, it's not theoretical and it's not a mystery who is behind them. And we know with the SolarWinds attack, the US government has said it was Russian sponsored, and with Hafnium, it was Chinese sponsored. And the reason that I mention that is we have to remember that this is not a technology problem. This is a political problem. We have across the world, relationships are at all-time lows between even allies and with adversaries. And geopolitical events beget cyber events. And so what we have seen in the changes of the actual tactics, I agree with my colleagues in that we haven't seen specifically new tactics. What we have seen is more audacity. We have seen broader scale targeting. We have seen a recklessness and a disregard for some of the safeties and protocols that are inserted into our software infrastructure. And in addition to that, as an example with Hafnium, so many web shells were dropped as they were being discovered that they put thousands and thousands of other organizations at risk. We watched after the Hafnium attack. Many other threat actors come to use the same vulnerabilities that had been initially put in. So I think that, yes, the tactics are very similar. The audacity and breadth are different, but we will not solve this in the cybersecurity domain. We will solve this diplomatically or not at all.
Thank you very much also for pointing to the political dimension of the problem. And I think this is something that Johan might be able to complete from his perspective as well, especially by having ENISA and European Union's perspective in mind.
Thank you. I would like to echo some of the thoughts of my co-panelists, saying that, if you look at, for example, the risks in supply chain security, that's nothing new. The European threat landscape that ENISA compiles every year, been pointing at this since 2018. We had it in 2019, we had it in 2020. No surprise, we'll have it also in 2021. The fact that cyber threats have become more sophisticated, more complex, more hybrid is also not something new. So, the question really is there, have we adjusted our tools and responses accordingly? It is clear that this spillover effect that Major General talked about, that is really serious. And I would like to also emphasize that it's not one magic bullet that solves the problem, and it's not only one source of the problem either. And looking from the technology point of view, we are far from security by design or security by default in our supply chains. So I wouldn't say it's a problem of this domain or the other domain or this world or the other domain. Everybody has to get their act together and make the world better in this sense.
Thank you very much. You actually opened the perfect floor to ask you a follow-up question, Johan. I know when you started, you were in your new position as director. You stated, well, the vision for the agency, from your perspective, rests on two pillars. The NIS directive and the Cybersecurity Act, where you were, of course, being involved tremendously. Well, we have seen the NIS being under review. The 2.0 version is, on the run. And of course, we have the new cybersecurity strategy of the European Union. From your perspective, what are the major renewals and takeoffs and incidents, the incentives, these strategy and review processes have produced over time in terms of tackling complexity and fostering cyber resilience in the European Union?
Thanks very much for the question. It's a hot potato. I would also add a third pillar now. It's not only the Network Information Security Directive and Cybersecurity Act, we also now have the Research and Innovation pillar, so the Competence Center and Network, which has recently been adopted by the co-legislators in Europe. And I think it's a very, very important pillar that will strengthen our arm of not only cyber knowledge, but also resilience in a long-term perspective. And I think it's also very important arm because it emphasizes the interconnectedness between the society and economy with the sector of technology and innovation. So when you look at the question of whether we have the right tools in place, whether we have the right direction that we can follow, I think the 5G risk assessment that Europe managed to put together collectively and then develop the toolbox to mitigate the risks stemming from this assessment. I think that was a very important milestone, and it also points the way forward. And indeed, if you look at the new proposal from the European Commission regarding the review of the NIS directive, it already indicates a possibility for sector-specific risk assessments. And I think that's very kind of a normal route for Europe to take. The big vendors, the big suppliers, they regard Europe as a single marketplace, rightly so. So also our response when it comes to potential risks and how to handle these risks, it needs to be coordinated. So the collaboration and coordination is something that the NIS2 will strengthen. It's also something that is intrinsically there when it comes to the new cybersecurity strategy. The Commission has put forward the idea of the cyber shield, which is essentially a way how we can share information between the public and private sector, and private sector internally as well. I think it is also very important when it comes to the response to the risks. But I mean, ultimately, it is about coordinating our activities, making sure that we share the same understanding of the risks, and we also share the same understanding of what would be the tools that could be employed case by case. And of course, every member state is a bit different, so that means that they can adjust the response as necessary. But we need a common methodology that we can use, so that the single market also has a single response to vendors and providers.
Thank you very much. I think especially, pointing to common methodologies and risk assessments in terms of the European perspective is kind of something that I would like to also give to the rest of the panels. Maybe Sandra and Bettina first. What are your maybe especially takes on this specific issue of, managing the complexity and, maneuvering through the new vulnerabilities we are seeing from your perspective, from the insurance perspective, and of course, from a threat intelligence perspective?
Sandra, maybe I go first and
Please.
You chime in. Okay. So yeah, I guess actually the first message here has to be, I think you got to have a very comprehensive holistic risk management in place in the first place. So that's a very important piece. I know that, there are different components, methods, tools. And I think the challenge here, clearly what we see is, given the speed of technology changes, giving the advantage probably hacker with their tools and their way of penetrating us is increasing drastically day by day. You got to keep this actually updated basically on a very, very regular basis. And this is really including all measurements you could think of to really make sure you have a holistic risk management in place. This is what we really realize as an insurer, being one of the largest cyber insurer. We analyze, of course, what we see from claims coming forward. And in some areas, it's really still very interesting. And maybe I can also speak at it from an IT perspective to see that basics are not in place. So it's really not always the highly sophisticated having an AI data capabilities in place already. It's really sometimes the basics are not introduced in companies. So that's why you have to have really a proper judgment on both sides of the scale, in the sense of what costs is it if I lose data, if I get liable for losing data, if I get a business interruption, what's that causing to my personal or company risk judgment and risk profile, but also what investments are valid to take into employees, into education, into the IT basics to really make sure that you treat toxic components super severely, super rigorous, that you treat basics like patch management, network segregations. It's a lot of basic things which we still see when we look into our claims, what's not in place. And I think that's actually the very important piece to achieve as a company, that you have a rigorous end-to-end risk management in place, judging what this is doing to you and where do you need to really invest to actually keep up with the pace which we see outside due to the new technologies coming forward.
And to follow up, I would say that I agree that for commodity threats and most of the hacks that we respond to, we have found that it was because somebody clicked on something they should not have clicked on, which seems very basic, but that continues to be one of the biggest reasons why we will get called in to respond to breaches. That being said, when you're dealing with a highly sophisticated, advanced, persistent threat, something like the Russian activity in SolarWinds, when we discovered the weaponized software update, it took us looking through 50,000 lines of code without really knowing where the origin of the threat was. We cannot expect the average company to have that kind of rigor for a mere software update. And if you think about it, best practices would have said to go ahead and update the Orion platform with the new software update, but that was weaponized. So we put organizations in an impossible position. In order to mitigate the risk of more common commoditized threats, we absolutely have to have the baseline of proper practice, of best practices. Those things continue to be not in place. I agree with my colleague. But no matter what, there has never been a firewall that blocked any of our red team activity. There has never been a technology that can keep out a persistent threat that is nation state sponsored. So I think we need to have a very realistic view of our risk profile. When we're dealing with most of the commodity threats, these basic practices are extremely valuable. But when you're up against a nation state that is determined, has a mission, there is very little that the given normal organization can do, and they need the help of their policymakers and the larger geopolitical community to bring the threat actors forward and to attribute their actions.
Thank you very much, Sandra. And I'd really like to pick this up and, go over to Major General Settler. From your perspective, I mean, you heard your other panelists in talking about, dealing with the basics and how, also the complexity of these new vulnerabilities, and also about actually detecting, the thoughts of a malicious cyber activity. How is the increasing interconnectivity of information communication technology, posing a specific security and strategic challenge for the armed forces. And which role does also the analytical strategic differentiation of cyber information space play by capturing these and addressing those challenges from your perspective, and this especially with the armed forces IT?
Yeah, thank you very much for these questions. Firsthand, today we are challenged by state actors increasingly rely on hybrid strategies, especially below the so-called threshold of military conflict. And let's just, for example, look at the way state actors systematically combine attacks on technical networks with campaigns aimed at influencing public opinion. That's surely one of the most challenging things for our democracies, and especially for the Western open democracies. That's why we at the Bundeswehr Cyber Information Domain HQ adopt a holistic approach. And we heard already, we need a holistic approach across the domains, and including the information environment, and especially have a perspective on the cyberspace, because if you want to stay in a conflict below the threshold of a military conflict, this is very often the first choice. And having said this, consequently, we look at systems, we look at organizations, and we look also at the people when we talk about how to foster our resilience, and we are only part of the society. You have an overall approach in societies to be resilient against the new challenges in the two dimensions I already mentioned. We push for security by design, but we also run awareness campaigns for our personnel. We monitor our systems, but we also monitor what people in theater say or believe. That's this information part. And we share relevant information with our partners cross domain, cross institutions, cross borders. Because in the end, today's conflict are not military conflicts. These are conflicts of the whole society against these kind of state actors on the other side of the house. And how can you best counter these challenges? It was already said, share information and share best practice. And it's more than a technical, it's also a challenge for our people.
Thank you very much. I think, Yuan, you want to add something.
Yes, I like to be a bit provocative always. So I also would like to perhaps, building on what my co-panelists said and put forward, and challenge a bit this status quo of thinking that collaboration, coordination is the only option. I think how to manage complexity is also a very complex set of, let's say, ideas that we might need to explore. And one thing that I think we definitely need to explore is how do we incentivize the vendors and how do we incentivize the producers to be better and actually manage this complexity themselves. It is unheard of in the context of the internal markets, where we have different categories of products, that we put the onus always on the user. We never do that. We always put the onus on the producer. We always put the onus on the vendor. Why is cybersecurity so different? And I like the fact that what Bettina brought out, I mean, basics are not introduced. Why? I think we need to answer this question. Why are they not introduced? Are we missing something when it comes to the incentives? Are we missing something when it comes to the liabilities? And I would like to go back to the proposal of the Commission on the NIS2. Why does the Commission introduce managerial liability for the essential service providers? I think it's an important step to create incentives to precisely introduce these very common cybersecurity risk management practices across the industry, which are necessary in order to deal with these basics. Otherwise, we are continuously talking about sharing information, building communities and coordinating them, but we are not incentivizing these communities to act in the right fashion.
Thank you very much. Well, actually, that's perfectly said. You said about missing liabilities. What about roles and standards, which is kind of a European topic, of course, but also to the rest of the panels, which role can standardization and certification play in actually tackling the complexity challenge?
For me, it's a key one. Actually, Joanne, I couldn't agree more. I think you mentioned a couple of things earlier, which I really want to second. I think it's interesting for me that over the past years, while there was times where you didn't even talk about security or cyber or attacks or whatever, it was kind of a no word to use. If I look at the past 2, 3, 4 years, we all realized if we don't, get together on this piece and really have the trust as corporates, also as large corporates or with your institutions, to really not just exchange best practices, but really fostering standards into our supply chains, making sure that these standards get taken up by everybody, then I think it will be not good enough, because only sharing best practices, as you said, Drew, and I couldn't agree more, that will not do the trick. But I think it puts a lot of pressure on all of us that we really open ourselves up for really working together on putting the right emphasis on the right standards, which we need to inject globally, because this is a global topic. It's certainly not a country-specific topic. So that's why I think we've just started this work with many of our large corporates, for instance, in our Charter of Trust community. And it takes time and trust to actually start putting it and pushing it in exactly this manner forward. But I think it's the only way of making sure that standards get injected and, and lived upon.
And I would also like to pose this question or give it to Major General Setzer. Is this also a conversation you have in the armed forces about, standardization and certification? And is it, going in the same direction, or do you have specific challenges which with the armed forces IT are posing in this respective issue at hand?
Thank you for this challenging question, because challenging is it for us as for others that we have a broad side of different IT. So if you look into armed forces, then you start with IT in combat systems, up to IT in office IT, to hospitals. You have the full range. And what is also challenging for all of us, you haven't started to build up your IT yesterday. We have started the years before yesterday. And you have all this IT in your whole system. So having said this, for us, it's an obligation to get standardization for the future. Because only then you can, in a system of systems, overview what kind of challenges concerning threats could have impact on your IT, and you can manage it. Therefore, we started to develop in the German Armed Forces a new code concerning you have clusters for IT services, and you don't allow that everybody takes the service or IT, may it be hardware or software by its own, have a kind of toolbox. Everybody uses this toolbox. You have to say, you have to make standards for these toolboxes, An overall toolbox is the cluster for cyber security. And then you can build up a kind of overview and inherent cybersecurity in your overall spectrum. And therefore, I say a kind of standardization is also a prerequisite for security by design. You need that to build security by design.
Thank you very much. Before we actually move on to the Q&A, and we already received some questions, I would like to pass on a last question to Sandra from a threat intelligence perspective. Well, you know, when we talk about threat intelligence and how it should evolve, you know, according to the cyber threat landscape, you know, big data and AI are kind of always talked about as a game changer sometimes, but also as a challenge. So what can these emerging technologies, you know, bring us in terms of, you know, having a more effective, you know, oversight about what's going on? And maybe also how, you know, picking up the norms and standardization, you know, discussion we just had, maybe should we also kind of, you know, before we bring them in, also think about norms and standards, how to use it, and how to make those solutions, you know, safe.
Well, I just want to caution how we think about this in one way. We respond to over 1,000 breaches a year, and many of those are fully compliant companies and organizations that have checked all the boxes. And so that, again, you know, as some of my colleagues said, there isn't a silver bullet when we go into this. And also, when we start talking about policies where the victim is continually expected to harbor the cost and harbor the responsibility, I think that we have to balance that out with understanding the root causes. And the root causes are human beings on the other side conducting these cyber criminal attacks, conducting these espionage attacks, and we can't lose sight of that. Now, looking forward to emerging technologies, you know, I think we are all both excited and terrified by some of the technologies that we're seeing. In an organization that I belong to at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, they saw how they were training an AI component to blend into the social media atmosphere, and this persona became incredibly racist and really reflected the worst of humanity. So as these things are developed, I would say that we need to caution the developers and the overseers of this. A threat intelligence analyst must always be thinking about the inherent biases in their work, and any tools in artificial intelligence should really be seen as a tool, not as a source of truth, and the explainability must be transparent and consistently evaluated for authenticity to what is real.
Thank you very much. So because we are like running out of time, I'm posing a question from the audience. The first one is, what is most pressing technology that we need to secure with priority? EJE from a list mentioned are AI, 5G, 6G and beyond, e-government, e-voting. So which of these, you know, pressing technologies do we need to secure most? Which are the priorities from your point of view?
All of the above.
I would also argue all of them. I mean, you can't really pick the winners there. And I think it's not only the high level and the very forward-looking technologies. Sometimes we speak about very low-key little microchips. So it is a very complex environment. I would very much agree with Sandra. No standard, no technology can provide us with absolute security. Security is always relative. And I think in this complex environment that we're talking about, we can only seek at the levels of higher security that we know of. There will be always risks which will be out there, which it will be difficult to mitigate in advance. but using the proper risk management methods and understanding the landscape better, that helps us also to foresee these unknown risks. And I think that's something that we need to take in partnership. So there I would very much agree that we need to have this common understanding, not only between us in the internal market, but also more globally. And this is something that is worth striving towards.
Does someone else want to add something to this question?
Yes.
No, then, yeah.
The challenge is that everything is connected with everything. So from the perspective of an attacker, he can choose the spot he wants to attack. So if you have a system and make parts of the system very, very safe, then he don't go for the safe one, he goes for the less safe one. That's the challenge for the defender. He has to defend everything, because on the other side you can have the spot. I have another perception. You don't have take it only technical. You have also to define what are the data which have to be especially safe. And there you can make the difference, because if you know what are your special data, you have to have a special security and trustful IT, then you can focus on that one. That's one of the things I guess everybody is doing, but we have to do it perhaps much more effective.
Yeah, Jürgen, I couldn't agree more. I had the same thinking on the data, because if I look now at our, the situation, we're all in COVID. And if I look at Allianz, we have more than 90% of our people at home. And while this is great that people can work from home, the risk of making sure that, the security is kept on the same level while you're working mobile from home or wherever you are, that's certainly adding to this complexity. So I would second what Johan said also in the beginning. Everything needs to be protected, but focusing on where data breaches and data will actually really lead to big liability issues for you as a company. That's certainly a focus area. I would also recommend from a insurance perspective to take care.
That's actually perfectly, because someone just posed a question from the insurance perspective, especially to you, Bettina. And he's asking if people wouldn't lock their doors probably or barely do any maintenance for their cars, would you offer them insurance? How about cyber?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thanks for asking. I mean, I get that question fairly often, like, can you insure, or would we insure everything? And I can clearly tell you no. If we do a risk assessment on a company, you look clearly on how well they are established, how much they take care of their IT, what's their IT security patterns, how they deal with protection and resilience. So again, it leads back into a holistic risk judgment, where certainly AI and predictive modeling can help to judge pieces better, but it will never go away that you need to have a holistic tools in place to look into this risk. And then you give a perspective on what that tells you for insurance and how much that costs then ultimately, because, you would, not insure someone if the door is open.
I think this is one of the major takeaways, the holistic approach, and we are running out of time. It was a very, very interesting discussion, and I'm thanking all of the panelists for their valuable contributions to the discussion and really the fruitful and lively discussion among them and among me. I'm hoping you enjoyed the panel. We are running out of time. Thank you all for listening, and thank you all for participating. That's from me. Goodbye and have a good evening, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.